Did the right teams play in the national championship game in 2000? Next on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, we're going back to the more controversial years of national championship play in the history of college football. Here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, we ask you to comment on what you think should have happened or what could have happened in these particular years, or any comments or debate topics that you have for us down in the comments section below. And, of course, subscribe. You got to subscribe. Therefore, you hit the bell for the notifications and you know when we're going live. The national championship race in 2000 involved Florida State, Miami, Oklahoma, and Washington. Well, take the Sooners out of play. They were undefeated in Bob Stoops' second year, so bam, they're in the national championship game. Of course, we're talking BCS era that started in 1998. So the big controversy came between Miami, Florida State, and Washington. Ironically, the three teams played 2 games between the 3 teams. That wouldn't normally happen. But based on conference affiliation and non-conference matchups, there you go. We had, and based actually at the time of the rivalry, Florida State and Miami were not both located in the ACC, so you just had a rivalry game there. Then you had Washington and Miami conveniently playing, but none of the results of these games seem to matter. And that's why the BCS is so screwed up. And we're highlighting certain years, but I could go through almost every year of the BCS and let you know how it screwed things up. All right, Oklahoma's in the clubhouse, 12-0. Boom. Big 12 champion. All right, we've got a Washington team. Again, we've got 2 games between these 3 teams. So Miami beat Florida State. And Washington, though, beat Miami. Both close games. So you would think either Miami or Washington would have been selected to play in the national championship game because they actually played difficult games against each other. And Washington actually beat Miami, but Miami could claim they beat Florida State. The one team that didn't have a win of that caliber was, of course, Florida State. So who got to play in the national championship game? Well, Florida State, of course. All right. Washington's loss was against a quality Oregon team that finished 10-2. So what should have happened? If you look at schedules and you really put weight on the Washington win against Miami, which I believe you have to, then Oklahoma should have played Washington in the national championship game. But we shouldn't have ever had a BCS and only one playoff game. We should always have multiple teams representing all the conferences in a college football playoff. Shouldn't be an invitational, as it certainly was then and still is now. It should be more of an objective system. So, if we move up this situation to the college football playoff era, there are your 4 teams that make it. Nobody really else had a gripe in this. Virginia Tech was 10-1, but they lost head-to-head to Miami by 3 scores. Oregon State, interestingly, the Beavers, one of the worst programs in the country over the last 10 years, over the last 5 to 10 years. They were really good then. They had a stretch in the early 2000s where they played with just about anyone, almost made a couple national championship games, and this was the year in which they were close. Oregon State finished 10-1, of course, playing in the same Pac-10 as Washington. Was it Pac-10 or 12? It was still Pac-10 at the time. And Washington won a stellar game against Oregon State, 33-30, or we could add the Beavers. That would have been interesting, a team we never talk about. Got to show some love to Jonathan Smith this season. Maybe he goes from 2 wins to 5 to something else. Anyway, back to 2000. Here's your playoff. It's cut and dry. Those are your 4 teams. Oklahoma's the 1 seed, Washington the 2. Based on the head-to-head over Miami and based on the head-to-head Miami over Florida State, we put the Noles at 4. Okay, we've got rematches all over the place. Oklahoma plays Florida State. Well, I've got to give the win to the Sooners. They actually did play Florida State in the national championship game at the Orange Bowl, and they whitewashed. Oklahoma's defense was that good. They beat Florida State. They shut them out. It was a 13-2 final, but the defense obviously shut out the offense. And you've got a rematch in the 2-3 game, Washington and Miami. So if you go by what happened on the field, of course, Oklahoma beats Florida State, then Washington beats Miami, and you've got a national championship game of Oklahoma and Washington, as we did of sorts back in 1984. So the rematches, let's go with what's on the field. I totally understand that. It makes total sense. Oklahoma plays the national championship game against Washington. I believe in a rematch. Oklahoma beats Florida State, as they did during that time of the season, but I'm going to give Miami the nod in a rematch over Washington. Washington fans are not going to be happy with me based on the 1991 analysis video and now here in 2000. But again, if we go chalk based on what happened on the field, Oklahoma, Washington national championship game. If we go what I believe would have happened in a rematch scenario, it's Oklahoma and Miami in a national championship game. Canes fans believe that they would have wiped out the Sooners. I get the thought. The Sooners were pedestrian on offense, and Miami produced the NFL players. I would love to see the count, but I believe it would be 2-1. And certainly the higher quality NFL players for the most part. But let's understand that Miami barely beat Florida State, and Oklahoma whitewashed Florida State. They controlled the game. It was a close game, but defensively they just dominated. So there's our call on 2000. There's your national championship college football playoff. It's clear cut. And based on what happened on the field, Oklahoma would have played Washington in the national championship game, but I believe the Canes would have won a rematch with the Huskies. Comments below, folks, and of course subscribe right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.